Hello students and welcome to this explanation on flexed budgets. This is an old exam question. It's a very nice question called Cleanscene, and I want us to run through this question today. It reads that Cleanscene shampoo manufacturers is in the business of producing shampoo for color treated hair. Shampoo is manufactured and packaged in 500 milliliter bottles. You received a phone call from their manager, Mr. Clearhead, earlier this morning. He informed you that their cost accountant, Miss Ulala, eloped with her boyfriend to the Caribbean islands the previous night. So obviously this was now before the whole Corona fiasco when we still fell in love and eloped. Upon her departure, she failed to complete a performance report. Mr. Clearhead is not impressed by her impulsive actions, and this leaves him with more work than he can possibly handle. He asked if you would be willing to set a performance report for Cleanscene shampoo manufacturers, and he provided you with the following information relating to the year ended 28 February 2019. So you will see that they have given you two level budgets, and then they've given you the actual information relating to 35,000 bottles. So we have direct material and direct labor, some maintenance, electricity cost, indirect materials, rental cost, and also indirect labor wage. Then you will see that they have given an amount that relates to each budget, and they've also given for the same overheads the actual amounts that were recorded as such. So the first thing we need to do is obviously go and just look at the requirements that were set out in the required part. It says you need to set a performance report for Cleanscene shampoo manufacturers for the year ended 28 February. Then we have to go back and see. We start with our different budget levels, and we use the different budget levels in order to make sure that we know whether this will constitute what kind of cost. Will this be a fixed cost? Will this be a mixed cost? Or will this simply be a bearable cost? So I always like to start with the easiest one as such. And the easiest one is always the fixed cost, because you simply need to go and look at it to see whether it's fixed. So I can easily see, if I look at my two budget levels, that the fixed cost, I just want to make this a little bit bigger so that we can type. The fixed cost will be the rental cost, and it will also be the indirect labor wage. And we know this because it's exactly the same, and it doesn't depend on the level of production, and that is kind of the definition of a fixed cost. It doesn't vary with your outputs. It's always the same, which makes sense, for example, for rental cost, because whether you are able to make 5 bottles of shampoo or 5 million bottles of shampoo, you have to pay the rent that was agreed upon in your contract. It is also, it can also be that some types of salaries and wages are also fixed, because again, you sign a contract with your employee and you say, we're going to pay you 1,000 Rand a month, or we're going to pay you a package of 20,000 Rand. That makes it a fixed salary or a fixed wage. Of course, wages can also depend on output. If we, for example, pay the person for a production or a production hour. So the fixed costs are quite easily to identify, and that's always why I do them first. Right, then we need to go and do our little tests and see, in terms of the other costs, will they constitute fixed costs, or will they constitute, I beg your pardon, variable cost or mixed cost? So I'm going to start with direct material, and the test is to take the Rand value, and we need to divide it by the output. So this can be units, bottles, hours, it doesn't matter. We're going to divide it by the output, and I believe that this gives us 10 Rand. That answer is 10 Rand. If I take the Rand value again and I divide it by the output, I get 10 Rand again. And now we know it's 10 Rand at each level. If I do my calculation, I get 10 Rand for every budgeted level. So therefore, this will be a variable cost. Moving on to our direct labor, we will take, again, do our little quick test, the Rand value divided by the output. And in this instance, I get an answer of R2.50. If I take my 100,000 for the second budget level and I divide it by 40,000 output bottles, I again get R2.50. So I know it's the same value when I do my division. I get the same value at every budgeted level, which makes this a variable cost. For maintenance, I'm going to repeat this calculation as well, or this little check, so-called mathematical check. I divide it by my output bottles, 25,000, and I get to an answer of R7.50. If I take the 300,000 and I divide it by 40,000 bottles, I also get R7.50. Again, I can now look at these calculations and I know they are the same at every level, R7.50, R7.50, and therefore this will be a variable cost. Next one will be my electricity cost. I'm going to repeat this check. So 370,000 Rand divided by 25,000 bottles of output, and I get to an answer of R14.80. If I repeat my check on a budgeted level of 40,000 bottles, 520,000, I divide it by the 40,000 bottles of output, I get to an answer of 13 Rand. So now I can clearly see that when I do my division, I get two completely different answers. On the level of 25,000 bottles, it's R14.80, but it's only 13 Rand for the 40,000 bottles. So because it differs when I do my division, I know that this should constitute a mixed cost. I am also going to do the test the last time in terms of indirect material. So that's going to be 150,000 Rand divided by 25,000 bottles of output. And I get an answer of 6 Rand at this budgeted level. 180,000 divided by 40,000 bottles. And I get an answer of 4 Rand 50. Again, I can see I get two different answers for the two budgeted levels. Please note how I do my mathematical checks or my divisional checks under the budgeted levels and I do not involve the actual cost here. Please take note of that. But these two give me different answers, so I know this is going to be a mixed cost. Wonderful. So now I can go back. I've already constructed for myself just a little template so that I don't record a 50-minute video where you have to watch me draw up a layout. So all I did was I draw up a layout for the performance report. You will see that traditionally this is not part of the performance report, but you do get marks for it because it shows that you've properly done the calculations. So the performance report is normally just a flexed budget, an actual, a variance, and then you have to indicate whether this is favorable or unfavorable. Now, under type for my calculations, it's of course my calculations. I use that to make my life easier. For the type, I'm just going to type in the type of cost that I'm working with. So I remember direct material was variable, direct labor was variable, maintenance was also a variable cost, electricity cost was mixed, indirect material was mixed, and I remember rental was fixed. If technology just wants to work with me, and also indirect wages were fixed. So I've made a note for myself and I know this is what I am working with. Then I'm going going to type in my calculation answers that I have just done under my calculations. So for variable cost, what was the variable cost under direct material? Well, I've done the calculations. It was 10 Rand at every level. So I'm going to go and fill that out. So here I'm going to say it's 10 Rand. Of course, I'm going to leave the fixed cost blank because there is no fixed cost that is involved in this answer. Then under my direct labor, again, I'm going back. I've done the calculation. It was 2 Rand 50 under each level. So I'm going to go and fill it out. Again, no fixed cost. And I'm going to do the same for maintenance. It was 7 Rand 50 at every level. So I'm filling it in. 7 Rand 50. Then for mixed cost, of course, I need to go and do my additional calculation for that one. So for momentarily, I'm just going to leave it. And then for the rental, we knew it was fixed cost. And then I'm just going to put the budgeted fixed cost in here just as a reminder for myself. So what was the budgeted rental? It was 1 million. And then for the labor, it was 600,000. So I'm just putting it in here. Right, so I'm also going to put it under my flexed budget because if it is a fixed cost and I'm calculating the budgeted cost at the actual bottles, then I use the budgeted value for fixed cost. So 1 million will be here and 600,000 will be here. The next step that I'm going to do is I'm just going to fill out all my actual values. So I'm approaching this in a way that I can make sure I score marks in as little time as possible. So I'm just going to fill in the actual values. Please note that the actual column and the actual values can never be edited. All right, so you can't calculate a value for your actual column. You can't have a situation where you make up a value. All right, that is illegal. It's not supposed to happen if you're an accountant. You should just use the actual data as it was recorded. So here for actual value, I believe I found it in this column here for the actual results. And it was for 35,000 bottles. So I'm just also making a note for myself. This was 35,000 bottles, and I'm also just putting it in here because it shouldn't be negative. Let me just try again. 35,000 bottles, and I'm also just typing it here, 35,000 bottles, because that's important information for me to know because that's the actual output, and obviously I need budgeted cost at actual bottles. Now, filling in all the totals for direct material, 315,000. Direct labor, 890,000. For maintenance, it was 245,000. Then for the electricity bill, it was 480,000. For my indirect material, 165,000. For my rental cost, it was 1.1 million. And for the indirect labor wage, 545,000. So I literally just copied the actual totals that were given to me because I'm not allowed to edit these because it was the actual results that cannot be changed. Right. So before we can calculate any variances, we need to go and do an additional calculation for our mixed cost. So we know that we need the rand value, and we also need the units or the bottles differences. All right, so I'm going to say units, and I'm going to say rand value. And this calculation, let's start with a calculation for electricity. Then we're going to have high and we're going to have low. I'm going to go back to my budgets to see what was the highest two of the budgets. Please note how I only use budgetary information to do this mixed cost split. So the highest one was 40,000 bottles. The lowest one was 25. Then what was the rand value of this? If I look at my electricity cost, it was 370 and 520. So I'm just filling in the highest and the lowest one again. Then we need to go and calculate the difference here. And the difference, you just subtract high minus low. And now I'm going to say I need to calculate the variable cost per bottle. And that will be the 150,000 Rand divided by the difference in the bottles, which was 15,000. So again, it's the Rand value divided by the units. And that would give us 10 Rand if I'm not mistaken. Then moving along, we're going to calculate total variable cost. Then we need total fixed cost, and total variable cost plus total fixed cost will give us total mixed cost. Therefore, I am now going to say, how do I get to total variable cost? Well, I simply use the highest units. So I need to multiply by the highest, I'm just going to say high units. So in this instance, it is the bottles. So I'm going to say it is 10 Rand times by what was the highest units? 40,000. So it's going to be 10 times the 40,000, and that's going to give us 400,000 Rand. What was the total mixed cost for the electricity? And again, we're going to look at the highest one. What was the highest total mixed cost for electricity? So electricity was given as a mixed cost. So I'm going to go back and say for electricity, the highest one was for 40,000 bottles. It was 520. So I'm going to back to fill that out. So normally this is the total mixed cost is a figure that you simply read from the budgetary data that was given, and you choose to look at the highest one. Now, if we want to know what the fixed cost is, it's easy because variable cost plus fixed cost must give us mixed cost. So we will simply say it's 520,000 minus the 400,000 to give us the fixed cost. So it's the difference between these two. So that gives us a fixed cost of 120,000 Rand. So I'm going to go back to my little calculation table, and under electricity, I'm going to say there's a variable cost portion, and here I fill in the variable cost per unit or per hour, whatever the question says. And that was this 10 Rand. So I'm just going to highlight it for you. And then I'm going to have to fill in the fixed cost, and that was the total. So it was this 120 that I just calculated. So I'm going to also fill that out. Right, we've solved one mixed cost. Now we have to solve another. So I am just going to take a shortcut so that I do not make a video that is extremely long. So I'm just going to take this formula again, but we're going to apply it to the other type of mixed cost. And that is, of course, the indirect material. I'm just going to delete these answers. Right, so we are still going to work with 40,000 and 25,000. And now we're going to have to fill out the indirect material, the higher and lower. If I go to indirect material, it's still 25 and 40,000 bottles. However, it is now 150 and 180,000. So the highest one was 180,000. The lower one was 150,000. And I am going to calculate the difference between these two. In order to get to the variable cost per bottle, I need to take the Rand value of 30,000 and I need to divide it by the difference in the units. So it's the difference in the Rand value divided by the difference in the bottles or units or hours or whatever is given in the question as a cost driver. So it's the 30,000 divided by 15, and that gives me 2 Rand. Now I need to go and multiply by the highest unit, which in this instance was 40,000. So to get to the total variable cost, it is 2 Rand times 40,000 units. And that gives us 80,000 if I'm not mistaken. Then we need to go and find the highest mix cost for indirect material. Again, I'm going back to my budgetary values. The highest mix cost was 180,000. Now it is easy to calculate the fixed cost. I'm going to say 180,000 minus 80,000. And that is then 100,000 Rand, which is the fixed cost. I'm going back to my summary to fill it in. It is 2 Rand variable cost per bottle, and it is 100,000 Rand fixed cost. And now it's pretty straightforward to do the calculations that relate to the rest of this performance report. So for the direct material, we're going to use our variable cost of 10 Rand, and we need to times it by the actual bottles. And the actual bottle production was 35,000. So I'm going to times it by 35,000. Then for the labor, we're going to take our 2 Rand 50, which was the budgeted variable cost, times the actual bottles of 35,000. And we're going to do the same with maintenance. It is the 7 Rand 50 budgeted cost, and we're going to times it by 35,000 Rand in all 35,000 bottles, I beg your pardon, to get to the Rand value. Then for the mixed cost, we're going to have a combination calculation now. So we're going to first calculate the variable cost portion, and then we're going to add the fixed cost. So it's 10 times the variable cost per unit times the actual bottles, and we add to that the 120,000 Rand, which is the fixed cost portion. Then we're going to repeat this calculation for indirect material. It is 2 Rand times 35,000 bottles, and we're going to add the fixed cost to it, which is 100,000. Righto. Then the variances are calculated as the difference. So let's see how we're going to argue about this. We're going to say, according to the flexed budget, so according to the budget, we were allowed to spend 350,000. In actual fact, we spent 315,000. So in terms of spending, we spent less than we were allowed to. So this is positive. So I'm going to say the variance is the difference between these two. And this is a favorable variance because I spent less than I was allowed to. Then in terms of the direct labor, I see there's quite a big variance there. However, let's just calculate it. We were allowed to spend 890,000. We spent 87500. So I'm going to calculate the difference there. And you will agree with me that this is very unfavorable. We were allowed to spend 87,500. We spent 890,000. So this is very, very unfavorable. Then in terms of maintenance, we were allowed to spend 262,500. We spent 24245. I'm calculating the difference here, and it is obvious to me that I saved money, so it's favorable. In terms of my electricity, we were allowed to spend 470,000. We actually spent 480,000. So we overspent, and that means that this is an unfavorable variance. Then we have our indirect material. We were allowed to spend 170,000. We spent 165,000. So we underspent by 5,000. We spent less money than we were allowed to. So this is going to be a favorable one. Then we have a 1 million rand that we were allowed to spend for rental cost, we spent 1.1 million. So it occurs to me that we overspent, which makes this an unfavorable variance. And in terms of our indirect labor wages, we were allowed to spend 600,000, but we spent 545,000. And again, we underspent money, which makes this a favorable variance. All right, so in a nutshell, that was the Cleanscene question. Quite an interesting question. It contained variable cost, mixed cost, and fixed cost. Definitely the type of question that you can expect in a test or an exam. I hope that you have enjoyed this video, that you've learned a little bit or something new. And then I will definitely see you in our next lecture.